Welcome to Born Curious, the podcast from Harvard Radcliffe Institute, which brings you thought-provoking ideas and events. I'm your co-host, Ivelisse Estrada. Although this week, I'm flying solo as my co-host, Heather Min, explores Machu Picchu and the Amazon jungle. Safe travels, Heather. To close out our season, we're bringing you select portions of our Radcliffe Day program, which this year honored the actor and filmmaker Jodie Foster, our latest Radcliffe Medalist, in a nod to her barrier-breaking career, which has contributed to important progress in an industry that has long been male-dominated. A panel discussion brought together film and television insiders to talk about representation, stereotypes, future opportunities, and more. Let's listen in on our panel, which includes Amy Brenneman, Mira Nair, Naomi McDougall-Jones, and Saladin K. Patterson, with Stacey L. Smith moderating. But first, here's our dean, Tomiko Brown-Nagin.
Though women have played essential roles in American film from the industry's earliest days, they have nonetheless long been underrepresented. As our panel moderator, Stacey Smith, has shown, from 2007 to 2023, women never accounted for more than 35% of the speaking characters in the year's top 100 grossing films in North America. And over the same period of time, just 7% of these films featured underrepresented women of color in leading roles. When we turn our attention to women's representation behind the scenes, it's a similar picture. According to an annual study by Martha Lawson, executive director of the Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film at San Diego State University, women comprised only 16% of directors of last year's 250 top-grossing films in the U.S. And when we broaden our focus to additional key roles, women accounted for just 23% of directors, producers, executive directors, writers, editors, and cinematographers. This strikingly low number reflects an increase of only 6 percentage points since the study first began tracking these data 27 years ago. Looking back on women's representation across her nearly 60 years in Hollywood, Jodie Foster once said, "I worked with no women on sets for the first 20 years of my career. Sometimes there was a script supervisor or makeup artist, but most of the time when I was young, it was just me and a whole bunch of guys." We've made exciting progress since then, and Jodie herself has been a powerful force for women in film and television. Still, there remains a long road ahead. We're fortunate today to be joined by distinguished speakers from academia, television, film, who will all consider the evolving nature of women's representation and recognition in the film and television industries, both as subjects and as creators. Now I'm pleased to formally introduce the moderator of today's panel. Stacey L. Smith is Associate Professor of Communication at the University of Southern California's Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism. She's also the founder of the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, which is the leading global think tank studying issues of inequality in entertainment. Among other honors, she was named one of 50 Agents of Change by Hollywood Reporter and the most influential person in Los Angeles by LA Weekly in 2015. And now, please join me in giving our Radcliffe Day 2025 panel a warm welcome.
My name is Dr. Stacey Smith, and I am thrilled to be here. And you are in for a phenomenal conversation. This is going to be a real treat. But before we start, I think it's really important to level set. And the dean just mentioned some really compelling statistics, but I'd like to take you just on a short journey of kind of the status of women, whether we're talking all women as a group or intersectionally, how they're doing in entertainment. So if you will, please buckle up. I happen to move a little fast, and I'm a tad bit negative when it comes to these statistics. So if you could bear with me, because the panelists on my left are going to help shed light on these things and make solutions and conversations really come alive. So let's start off with some basic statistics that I think are really important. The dean already kind of mentioned this, but I just want to illustrate that if we think about women directors from 2007 to 2024, only 13% out of 1,800 films. Now, the good news is that it's up from 2.7% in 2007. The bad news is it's at 13%. And for all of you that are turning to the neighbor next to you and saying, well, television is so much better. No, it's not. Only 22% of series creators are women. And this has basically not changed in the last couple of years. So moving on to the next really uplifting piece of news, things are really important here. And we're going to talk a lot to one of these legendary directors that is sitting to my left. The reason why the director data is so important is because when we take our data and we put it into 4 categories, movies directed by white men, movies directed by white women, movies directed by underrepresented men, and movies directed by underrepresented women, so non-white women, we find something really compelling emerge. The stories that do the best, critically, are stories that are directed by women of color. Exactly. Mira contributes to this data. Now, I also want to underscore one other thing as an academic. These numbers are not fantastic. And so in my classes, this would typically represent a not passing grade. But that's a different story altogether. Now, when we turn our attention to who's driving the storylines, because this is where things are a little bit interesting in some respects. For the first time in the history of cinema, since storytelling has ever existed, first time last year, the top 100 films, over half were centered on girls and women. This is extraordinary. Now, what is problematic, though, only 13 of those films were centered on women of color. That should be at least 20%, according to population statistics in the United States. Only 8 featured women 45 years of age and older. Amy, we're going to talk about some of these ageism issues in the industry, and only one, I believe it was something about Possum Trot was the name of the movie, featured a woman of color 45 years of age and older. So we're not seeing intersectionality centered in terms of Hollywood movies, because that's what this chart references. Now, the last slide I want to talk about is really one that I think the dean referenced is important to underscore. When we talk about leads and we talk about directors, a lot of the biases that drive why folks aren't being hired are really explicit biases, and we can talk about those today. But this, one of the easiest things to fix on screen, whether it's in film or in television, is speaking characters. And we look at every speaking character in the top 100 films every year, and it's a really low bar. Someone only has to say one word. The numbers haven't moved. Roughly 30% in 2023, 29.9% in 2007. In television, it's in the 40% around there. But these numbers are really driven by implicit biases. And I know one of the expert on implicit biases is here at Harvard. But this is something easy to fix and has not been changed. So I want to punctuate our panel on some of this data and turn to my panelists. I'm going to briefly introduce them. They need no introduction. They are each legends in their own right. So maybe let's hold applause till the end, and I'm going to briefly introduce them, and then we're going to hop into an engaging conversation about the reality of working in the entertainment industry and maybe ways of changing some of these numbers. To my immediate left is director, producer, former actor, Mira Nair. Please welcome her, even though I said hold applause.
But they can hold it.
It's Nair like fire.
Yeah, Nair. I like that. Amy Brenneman, actor, producer, writer of a whole series of different content. Please welcome Amy to the stage. Naomi McDougall-Jones, actor, producer, writer, executive producer, and author. And Saladin K. Patterson, producer, writer, EP of an amazing lineup of shows we've all heard of and consumed many times. Please welcome. Okay, Mira, I know you didn't want to go first, but I'm starting with you. As we've talked about, only 7% of directors of films in the U.S. Are directed by women. And it's a little better more recently, but when we look globally, only 5% of films in India are directed by women. So we really have a representational crisis still behind the camera. Can you shed light on this statistic for the audience and the resistance to hiring women in the top leadership position in Hollywood films?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure to be back in Radcliffe, where I came when I was 18 years old. We're next to the building in which I got my first grant, $300 for Education for Action, which led me to actually photograph in Mexico and make my first body of work. So it's a very moving for me to be back, especially now that Harvard stands up and has offered us the courage of resistance. It's really extraordinary. And we need that like a bolt in every part of our body because it is such a uncertain time. So thank you. I just have to speak of my experience, and this Harvard Radcliffe has been a very important part of it because what I was taught here was the foolish confidence of the Ivy League. I was taught that anything is possible. You just have to ask for it. When I was revving myself up to go and visit Denzel Washington, he wasn't even such a big star for my second film, Mississippi Masala. I thought, what can I do? How will I get him? The nerves that come from approaching. Even he was not such a big star, but still. And it was the Harvard training. Like, what's the worst that can happen? He'll say no, right? But it's that confidence which is very much a part and parcel of making films, of expressing oneself creatively. And I can only speak to your extremely dire statistics by my own experience, which is that I never came here to be a Hollywood A-list director. I came to make my own experience and my own stories be found and be made on a world-class level of excellence. If I came to be a part of the A-list, I would be subjected to, rom-coms with white people. And that is not my forte, and neither is it my interest. So I made my stories so distinctive that only I could tell them. And that was the way I marketed myself or financed myself in Hollywood. And then when the films became interesting and got an audience, Mississippi Masala, I wondered who would listen to a hybrid love story. There was no Asian African American romance, or not even a romance. There was no intercultural story until that time. And there actually still isn't that much. But it was when I saw lines around the block of hybrid couples, seriously, in different parts of the world, I felt, wow, people are listening actually to my kind of weird story, right? And that's the power of having an audience who is listening, who don't get it from anywhere else, became my distinction and my calling card. And that is really how I have, in a way, either used Hollywood to help me or where Hollywood has come to me. It was because of the success of Monsoon Wedding years later that they came to me with Vanity Fair and $50 million and the darling Reese Witherspoon. Because they figured that finally the money talks. Finally, if you're making the money for whoever, you can have the access in your hands to make bigger whatever films. But it was big. So that's the thing. And in making my work, it is not all down the Hollywood route. And therefore, these dire statistics, while being so depressing, always tell me that we have to look elsewhere, actually. And the way, the technique for me is to always find finance from different places, not just from one place. So if you look at the namesake, 33% comes from Japan, 33% comes from Fox Searchlight, and 33% comes from India. The formula of that gives the artist complete creative freedom. And finally, that is it. I mean, I am a great team player so long as I have the last word. So it is a collaboration and it is a thing, but the bigger the budget, man, you got to have the bigger team to listen to and to sift and to distill and still pretend or hope that you're making what you started out to make. So it is the diversification of money, of where to get it, which allows me personally that freedom, which is almost an impossibility actually in Hollywood. So that's where I fit in, and a lot of that has also, even that career, even that unusual independent career, has come from a lot of women who happen to be in power at that time. If you look at, I mean, the people I worked with, Nancy Utley of Fox Searchlight, she saw the power of how women who tell their stories can actually make good money. It's not a charitable act. Nancy Utley or Claudia Lewis or Michio, who financed Kama Sutra, a woman from Japan, Sheikha Mayasa from Qatar, who has helped, who financed The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which I didn't want to go to Hollywood for, because the censorship is so within itself. They will never let you say the unsayable. I know that from making films there. So it is that, it is to find that company, but it's very hard to do. And now less and less. Now you don't have that many female executives. Now in even less female leadership, in finance or in Hollywood. So that is the tightrope that I follow. And that is a different, it's a tightrope to be able to make is stories that only I think I can make. Because if we don't tell our stories, no one else will tell them. And if they tell them for you, then they will tell them terribly.
So, given that Mira just ended on a financial note, I think I'm going to jump to Naomi, because Naomi's been doing some really interesting work that I think we all need to hear about. And we know from research that the ways in which the industry sees, at least in the US, women directors, they really see them through a gendered marketplace lens. They think they tell small stories. They think that their stories don't list in the marketplace, right? And that there are only a few women directors that can handle a big crew and a big budget, right? And so financing, you have to find friendlies. And Naomi, you are the executive in charge of the 51 Fund. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey on how you got to the fund, particularly navigating through COVID and off of COVID, and what has that mean for greenlighting stories that are centered on women?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So I'm a creative, and I fell into co-founding the 51 Fund with the former CFO of the city of Chicago. I didn't know that was a job before I met her. But it's a private equity fund to finance films by female filmmakers. And what I want to share with you is what I have learned about the system through that lens, because it's really different than seeing it as a creative. So I'm just going to paint that picture for you, because I see a huge opportunity ahead of us, and I'm hoping that some smart person in the room is going to pick up this information and solve it. So the first and most important fact that you need to remember, if you remember nothing else I say, is that films by and about women and films by and about people of color make more money. This is true. I have the receipts. So dollar for dollar spent, these films are actually more profitable, which actually makes sense if you think about it, because white men are only about 30% of the US population and less globally. So the problem is actually not a lack of market demand for these stories. It's also not a lack of incredibly talented, brilliant filmmakers who would like to tell these stories. The problem is, and has always been, with the gatekeepers in between those two bodies of people. I'm talking about studio executives, agents, production companies, financiers, sales agents, and distributors. So what we're talking about is a systemic problem. And when you're looking at trying to fix a systemic problem, there are two theories of change. There's the incremental change model, and then there's the massive creative disruption model. And generally speaking, to change any system, you need both working in tandem. So let's talk about the incremental change, which is working within a system to little by little heave that system forward in the direction you're trying to go. And everything we've done over the last 8 years, Me Too, Oscars So White, collectively yelling really loudly and hard at the gatekeepers to get with the program and do a better job. And as the statistics have pointed out, it's been kind of incremental change. Now, I'm not dismissing any of that. It has been so important, right? We woke people up. People are paying attention. The 51 Fund is also working from that incremental change perspective, just getting, a few more films every year by female directors into the system. And all of that's been very important, everything we're doing. And it's still incremental, right? And the problem with incremental change is I did the math on this recently, and if we continue at the current rate of progress, it will take something like 287 years to reach gender and racial parity in film, which is longer than I have. So, alongside incremental change, we also need to keep exploring the possibility of a massive systemic change and disruption. So the gauntlet I want to throw down is that in the next 5 years, we have the single biggest opportunity of our lifetimes to foundationally shift this entire industry at long last towards parity. And maybe one of you or somebody you know is going to invent the technology or the model or the system that is going to get us there. So the reason this opportunity exists is that the subscription streaming model, which was pioneered by Netflix, of course, in 2008, and which the entire industry has now since been forced to adopt, is currently exploding. To say that Hollywood is in a nuclear meltdown phase of its current model is an understatement. And the reason is that the subscription streaming model was always impossible. The math never worked. The only reason it's lasted as long as it was this sort of VC funding that said, don't worry about profit for now, just take over the market and we'll worry about profit later. And now they're realizing the profit is actually impossible, and so here we are. And this is very bad news for a lot of our friends and colleagues, and this is causing real pain and job loss and hardship, which is terrible. But the good news is that this is a cycle that happens in Hollywood every 20 to 30 years, where the current model comes up, it has its heyday, it goes into decline, and some new model comes in to disrupt it. This is the cycle that it always goes through. So right now, the old model is, as I said, in a nuclear meltdown phase. And so within the next 5 years, some new model will come in to disrupt it and will become the model of the next day. And maybe you will be the next Reed Hastings who's going to invent this new technology or model. And our single biggest opportunity is that it is actually possible that in the design of that model, you could design it with parity at the center of it, in the DNA of it, as opposed to trying to shove it in after the fact, which is what's always happened before. And again, I just want to remind you, there is money to be made here. We are leaving money on the table by not telling these stories. So if this next model would like to make more money, and a multitude of voices and perspective and opportunities are baked into that model, we could actually reach parity in film within our lifetimes. And why does that matter? Well, it matters to us so that we can have jobs, right? And tell the stories inside of us that the world hasn't heard. But that may not matter to you. I don't know. There are a lot of things to care about right now. But here's why it should matter to you. Because this is the industry that shapes our minds, which then shape the entire world. The studies show that the films we watch shape everything from our job choices to our hobbies to our marital status to our images of ourselves. The movie industry shapes our minds and we shape reality and our future. And so what stories we tell now and who tells those stories is going to determine the future of everything. And so even now, even in this moment where there's so many really, really important other things to care about and so many fires to put out, while we're doing that, we also have to look at the underlying cause that is making us sick in the first place. And if you're going to disrupt that anywhere, the film and television industry is an awfully good place to start.
And Naomi, folks can check out the 51 Fund online and some of the work that you've been doing as well, and the movies and content that one's coming out this summer. Excellent. If you want to check that out. Amy, you have had a long and incredible career as an actor. And that is an act of resistance. That's a political act for a woman in Hollywood to make it past 40. There's a sell-by date, and we count down the days in our lab to whether someone will make it over that age because of the data. Very few women have stories centered on them if they're north of 45. Only 25% of all speaking characters are women 40 years of age and older, right? So if we're going to see someone on screen that's older, it's going to typically be a white man. Now, if you do the math, we'd have a population crisis if you think about how it tips 75 to 25%, but we can have that conversation at a different point in time. I want to talk to you about how you navigated your career, and how has it been necessary for you to be a multi-hyphenate to really be able to pick the stories and projects you want to be involved with and have that long tail of a career?
Um, First of all, I just can't believe you are the most influential person in LA in 2015. And LA is really big. Also, I wish my last name rhymed with fire. I'm so honored to be here and really inspired by what was just said. Um, I also am an alumna, and I very much related to what Mira said about I have always assumed that the thing that I want to do doesn't exist yet. And I guess in that way, I really am an entrepreneur. I was a comparative religion major here as an undergrad. I am an untrained actor. But I was one of the founding members of Cornerstone Theater, which, yay, where we worked for about 6 years after graduation. We worked to mostly geographically remote places and did theater with the people that worked there. I was deeply interested in that. I continue to be deeply interested. I didn't have a headshot or an agent until I was 27 or 28, which seems very young to me now. But I just had my own path. Then I really related to that quote of Jodie's about being the only girl on the set. Then I got NYPD Blue, and I was the first person to get naked on network television. So that's what you get with a Harvard degree. um, but I remember no intimacy coordinator. And only in retrospect did I get really angry about that, because I was like, God, if there's an action sequence, like, God forbid there's not a stunt coordinator, but like a love scene, it's like Amy will figure it out. Stallone, De Niro, she'll just figure it out. I'm like, wow, we're so vulnerable. I was the girl in an action movie with Sylvester Stallone the same year that I was in this kind of edgy indie, and the same year that I was in this play at Lincoln Center. And I remember saying to my agent at the time, by the way, you know where this is going to go. I was like, oh my God, it's so perfect because I'll be in a blockbuster and then I'll go to Sundance. And well, the Stallone, it was literally the last movie, the action movie that Stallone made, because his rotator cuff was messed up. The movie went straight to video, and the play was an abject failure. And then I thought, I think I'm going to create a TV show. There's no foolproof plan. So why not just try and my mother, who's in the first class of law school here at Harvard, and the second female judge in the state of Connecticut. And she had said from the time I got into TV, she said, why isn't there a show about juvenile justice? And I said, shut up, Mom, you're dumb. And then I was like, So I created a TV show with no expectation at all. And I do think that we were not the one to watch. I've always preferred to work under the radar because I get creatively more free. But it was my story. It was absolutely my tone. It was my family. It was Barbara Hall, who's a beautiful writer, amazing writer. got this. I have a very dear friend who's about 10 or 15 years older than me. It was network TV, so she had to languish in her 50s until she could be a grandma. Streaming, I was like the bad guy on Goliath I mean, there's all sorts of weird, funky stuff. So that's the good part of streaming. The bad part is the economic model has absolutely collapsed. Um, but, and then the last thing I would say is just childcare. There needs to be better childcare. I mean, when Judging Amy hit, I was 35 and I was like, oh my effing G. I have to have a baby with this schedule. And it's not great. And so Shonda Rhimes, I know lots of people on Grey's and they have babies and she's, she's the boss. And she's a mom. And so I do think that childcare is part of it. Is that boring? That's a boring way to end.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you. And what's interesting about Netflix too, we evaluate them every year, and it's really fascinating because as the leading streamer, they're over 50% female and over 50% people of color when it comes to on-screen portrayals and storytelling. So Naomi, they found the audience and the audience across the lifespan, which is really important and incredible, particularly with Gen Z. And necessary. And someone else who has connected amazingly well with audiences, Saladine, your CV is incredible of all the shows that you have EP'd and how you connect with audiences from the writer's room to that executive producing credit. And I picked up something that you said when you were filling the writer's room for the Wonder Years. You said that your goal was to find people who could tell stories with a sense of nostalgia, but who also understood what it was like to be an other or an outsider, which really relates to Mira and Amy's comments about finding those unique niches that, haven't been expressed or told. So, can you tell us a little bit about that description and how it reflects your path in Hollywood as a writer and a producer? And how does that description lead you to the makeup of the writers' rooms that you form?
Sure, thank you. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm here as an ally and an advocate, not just because I think I have the longest hair of anything up here as well. Um, but so yes, I made that quote because it's very important to me. I've always been, I would call myself an other in environments, whether it be in a majority white environment, in academia or in work or whatever. And because of that, I know the value of people, whether it be people of color or women, when you have to both know the world of the majority and also your own world, it gives you added asset value. So when I was putting together a staff for the Wonder Years, the point of view, my version of Wonder Years was going to be through the eyes of a Black family in the late '60s. I needed people who could relate to that feeling of knowing how to be an outsider and thriving as being an outsider, but also having to know how to navigate the world. So you have to know both sides, right? And I just needed people who in their own personal experiences reflected that. And, which meant I wanted to look for women and people of color or, people on different sides of the sexuality spectrum. Anyone who was an other, I felt could relate to it and could just kind of find the heart of that matter. And it's certainly something that, came up from my experiences, like I said, whether it be in school, also when I had to navigate the Hollywood system as well as an other. It's something where, similar to how people don't realize how, movies directed by women and featuring people of color make more money, like they seem to ignore that. Hiring people who have diverse experiences and could, talk on both sides of a situation only makes the creative content better, right? And so I learned early on how to leverage that to my advantage. To answer your question, my first job was as a sitcom writer was for a show that was created by Al Jean and Mike Reese, who are Harvard alum. They were in the first generation of the Harvard Lampoon that came out to LA to kind of take over for a while. Um, I love Harvard though, guys. So when I reached out to them though, the first thing I made sure I mentioned was that I went to MIT because it was a little bit of a, they would call it an equalizer, I would call it a little bit of a flex, um, but it's just, I learned you have to kind of, especially in writers' rooms, right? Women and people of color have to go into a room that's predominantly white male and make them feel comfortable. Okay, and I'm just being honest. It's about making them feel comfortable because it's a very intimate place, a very vulnerable place. So as someone who is an other, you do that by showing common ground, right? when I was on Frasier. I made sure I lived with I actually have a master's degree in psychology, guys. Okay. Again, it lowers the guard, right? But it's something, and I say it, obviously trying to make a joke about it, but it's what we have to do. And it's also something that I think I've seen a lot of women have to do to the challenges are similar, but they are kind of different, because at the end of the day, there's one less thing I have to make them comfortable about than a woman does, right? And so, it's a little bit of a higher burden. But again, I do think it's important to realize that if the goal is for creative content that people can relate to, that you can see and identify yourself in, people who've had to navigate worlds as others and minorities or women, I just think are better equipped to do that. And that is something that has definitely benefited me, for sure. Like on Big Bang Theory, I was like, hey, I actually went to MIT, okay? So let's stop it right there, okay? In terms of whether I can do this. The one time it didn't work, and I just say this anecdotally, the one time it didn't work was I met with George Lucas for the first time, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, huge fan of his. He was doing Red Tails, and I was like, okay, I'm from Tuskegee, Alabama. Black male, this is in the bag, right? And that's the one job I did not get.
Mira, I'm going to start with you, but this is a question for all of you or whoever wants to jump in. Inclusion happens when we have an open mind and we don't let our biases dictate previous decisions, let them dictate future decisions, right? Really having an open mind. And so, Mira, let's start with you. I'm curious how you approach finding stories and finding actors in a way that may not be traditional, or maybe outside of the box, that leads you to a more inclusive, holistic, and authentic form of storytelling.
Well, I came from the tradition of cinema verite, cinema of truth. I learnt here with the great Ricky Leacock, who was teaching at MIT. That was my first course in filmmaking about the handheld camera and how to enter people's lives. It was pure cinema verite, no fiction about it. Enter people's lives, tell a story of their life over time with no idea of how that story might unfold. And in many ways, I still believe that that kind of truth is much more powerful than fiction sometimes can ever be, because the extraordinariness of life is actually around us. And that was my training. I made about 7 films over 8 years, both between India and here, and lived with strippers in a nightclub outside Bombay for 4 months. My poor parents disowned me for like, oh, Mira, I don't know where she is these days, and so on. And sometimes even in that waiting in those dire situations, you wonder if you're nuts. But what you learn is the extraordinariness of people, precisely the people who are considered marginal, the people who are considered the other, the people who are marginal to actually any society. You learn their resilience. And I often love a sense of humor that comes with it, the bawdiness with which they see the world with such clarity. I loved that, and that is what the stuff of my cinema was about, until I got tired. This was the 80s, early 80s, tired of audiences for this kind of documentary. I used to sell to television, but it's like selling to a void. I didn't know what the audiences were feeling with the work, and that's what led me to make my first feature film, which was Salam Bombay, which is, thank you. Thank you, 1987, 1988, where, like, with all the training of being an actor, of being in the streets with my camera, it was how to tell the story of street kids who come to this city to make a living, and what they dream about, and how they still really ultimately yearn for nothing more than just a childhood, but what happens to them. And this was an amalgam of all my training. But obviously, in India, like many places, but India is riddled with class. You open your mouth, you can tell which school that person's gone to, versus who you're living next to and who you will never know. The cheek by jowl living of the upper and the lower classes is just part of our lives. So I vowed that with Salam Bombay and making a film on street kids, that I would work with street kids and not with, they would actually teach me what to do rather than the other way around. But and to mix that up with actors, at least some trained actors, they may not have been stars, but some trained actors, but to create a world that I found had the same extraordinariness of ordinary life and the same electricity of what ordinary life can give you with the characters of the people. And so that's why, and so I worked with actual kids. So it was always the openness to finding the most authentic person. And with the street kids, it's okay. Danny Boyle asked me before he made Slumdog, what do I do? And I said, you can't have street kids speaking the Queen's English. You just can't. I mean, it would just take me out of it in 1 second. So he came to his own, antidotes. But basically, my style was always about that. But of course, I love working with skilled actors. It's much easier in some senses for me. But I'm constantly, in retrospect, constantly making both work. But I think that training is because that I can do is because of of working with real people, working with humility. I think the great thing about the most important thing, many important things about being a director, but one thing is to be able to be a fine listener. You've got to listen to life. You've got to listen to people. You've got to have the humility to look at what is in front of you, and you have to have the listening to make that, then you distill that to make it into your art. But if you don't listen to the world, you're just spinning your own ego. So that is a huge thing about how to find people who may embody the spirit that you're looking for, but may not be the trained person. But with one's own training and having like no rules to get what I want from them, it's okay because I have that background. But so I'm open with working with young actors, with working with non-actors, but I also demand a lot from them. You can't just like have a party on my set, because it is about really all the director's work is to have all the folks. No one, oh, that's the legend, or when he comes on, the screen comes alive. If I hear that, I have failed. So you have to create a world where everyone has their equitability and their need to be on that screen, and that is the director's work. Yeah.
So, what about the three of you in terms of Mira just articulated her openness, and that allows her to really approach talent in a novel and see the talent for the talent's sake. Where have you experienced places where you could push someone forward that might be overlooked by the system, that you see their talent and say, I want to bring them forward, whether it's writing credits, on set, EPing, um, a PA. Where else have you seen this play out in the productions that the three of you have been involved with?
I'll start. When we did the Wonder Years, which was the reimagining of the original Wonder Years from the 80s, obviously it was based on the Black family. It was very important to me, the representation that I was going to help put on the screen, and the body image of women is certainly a very important thing in terms of media and representation. I have a daughter, who's growing up as a Black woman, and it was very important for me, for not just for her to see herself, for her to see herself in a healthy way, right? So when I went to casting, I really wanted, when we were looking at potential actresses in the show, I really wanted my actresses to represent, make sure I say it correctly, represent how real women look. And not to, again, nothing against women who look like Hollywood women, obviously, nothing against that, but wanted, had natural body types, body sizes and things. And to their credit, ABC was very open to that as well. That gave me an opportunity to speak to the question of taking people who may have been overlooked, in other casting situations. I did it with Lee Daniels, who is very outspoken. As Lee would say, we had the blackest black show on TV. Okay. My entire family was dark skinned, which was the first time ever on TV.
I think Mira said it with the word humility. And I think particularly with decision makers, the people who decide what movies get made, which is again, studio executives, financiers, agents, sales agents, distributors. And so at the end, making an investment decision like choosing a director for a film, like anything, is kind of a gut feeling, right? It's an act of trust. There's something in your body that tells you that this is the thing to do. And guess where bias slips in? And so there's a huge problem that we have of those decision makers. Like if you think the stats are bad for female directors and directors of color and all these things, look at the executive suites and the agencies, and like the stats there are a lot worse. And so so in choosing what films we were going to finance for the 51 Fund, we had a process where because I don't know what film, the Black community is going to want to see, or like, of course I don't. And so there's the humility of saying, okay, I know my life experience, but as the person who at this particular moment in time and the group of people who are wielding this purse, we can't rely on our own gut sense to know what other audiences are going to like. And so, we developed a process of hiring other readers from different backgrounds and different perspectives to get their gut perspectives, and we listened to them. And so again, just approaching these decisions with the humility that we don't know everything and that our gut sense is going to be wrong if we're choosing stories for people that are not for us.
It's interesting that sometimes people ask, well, why is it so important to have inclusion? And we know that when women work behind the camera, there's not only more girls and women on screen, more stories are centered on women. There's more women 40 years of age and older on screen, and there's more racial and ethnic diversity on screen, and there's more women working as cast and crew. So the benefits of having women in a top leadership position are actually really important. And so, Saladin, I want to start with you. Hollywood has been hit hard, like many industries. COVID first, the dual strikes second, and then the horrific fires in Los Angeles. Can you tell me a little bit about the tenor of the entertainment industry right now, and then the headwinds of the current administration?
I mean, it's a story of both good and bad, right? With the strike causing the contraction, studios are pulling back on production, right? And that what that really means is they're willing to take less risk. And as you guys have spoken to, in their minds, that means, okay, what's more bankable? They fall back on some of those standbys. They're going to appeal to, the broadest audience, which usually means let's go back to things starring white men, that has the broadest appeal in their mind. It comes after a period, which I do want to point out, which is very good. So, after the summer of racial reconciliation, the George Floyd summer, if you want to call it, during that period, you had the Issa Raes of the world, the Ava DuVernays of the world. Shonda was always Shonda. But that was a period where it was a good time to be a woman of color in the industry. I had a hard time finding women of color to hire because they all had so many jobs that offer them more money, which is great. And because Hollywood was valuing their specific voices, and the fact that they were authentic, right? But then, as Hollywood does, once that, is not in favor anymore, like in the current administration and things, you start to see some of those pressures and headwinds. So I do unfortunately see the combination of the contraction and also the fact that there's just this fear of, because again, to be fair about it, Hollywood does have to appeal to the whole country, right? And they're realizing that, many more people in the country than we thought before feel certain ways. And so there's a fear of we don't want to alienate them. And I think that is resulting, unfortunately, in less risk-taking when it comes to putting people of color and women behind the camera and on screen. In terms of what's going to change that, money will always change it, in Hollywood. And so it's going to be cyclical. But there are places, again, I will say, after hearing what everyone up here is saying, a key element to me is having women in control in the studio and executive ranks. That's where difference is really going to be made. We can get more and more women and women of color in those decision-making seats. I think that's going to push against the headwinds.
I feel excited about what I think is about to happen in independent film out of this situation, and plus one to everything about what is happening. There's this periods in the past where independent film meant truly independent, which meant that filmmakers who the system would not give money to got to make, scraped it together, made films, and those films again found audiences, and many of those directors then became our most iconic system directors now, and so the cycle goes. Um, and and we've been through this period recently where what we call independent film has not really been independent film. There's always been almost been this sort of like co-opting of independent film by the system, so that when I watch young filmmakers coming up, if you're making an independent film that's going to have any life or financing, you kind of have to go through the same agencies and the same pathways that you'd have to go through anyway. And what that's done is really discouraged like true independent filmmaking from happening, because it sort of seems like because all the filmmakers are sort of flinging themselves at this system to try to get picked by the same system. So it's again like not really independent film. And I think what's about to happen as a result of this contraction, what I'm seeing with other filmmakers, is there's suddenly this like, well then fuck it. Like, let's just go make stuff. And like, I have a feeling that we're about to see this huge explosion of true independent film again. So I feel very excited about that, because I think there's this way in which that outside game may push whatever the new system becomes forward in this much faster way.
I'll just say very quickly that my belief in making films, especially in what you're saying, Saladin, is the more specifically local I am in whatever the subject I'm making, the more universal it can become. And if you take a film like Queen of Katwe, for instance, it's a film I made with Disney in 2016. It's a completely true story of a 11-year-old girl who a water seller in the worst slum who learns how to play chess and then becomes a grandmaster within a year, and then buys her family out of the slum, through the acumen of her brain. And this was, I live in Kampala, Uganda. I had made Mississippi Masala in 1991, and this was, 20, 30 years later, and I really know what it's like to live there. I know the humor, I know the style, I know the savoir-faire, the survival instinct is fantastic, and I'd never had seen it anywhere. So when Disney, in fact, came to ask me to make this film, I thought that they would let me make it but whitewash it completely, but they didn't somehow touch me while doing it, and I made the film exactly, almost like an independent film. But it was because I think there was a sense of truth and actual great humor and acumen, and also taught that life could be lived without white saviors, because always this model of the African film is that the bloody guy comes there and gives you a bath, and then you're all cleaned up, and then you can go back to the slum. It's not that at all, and it's never that actually in real life. But this was a film that showed that. And when they tested, the film did well. Disney didn't quite know what to do with it. They projected it as a summer blockbuster in sports, but it was quite different from that. Kasparov said it was the best chess film he'd ever seen. But what was interesting was when some students from Oxford did a big database sort of analysis of what the power of that film was within the African continent. They compared it against young people in Africa all over the place, seeing Disney other films, and then this one. It was marked to inspire. It immediately created much higher marks in exams. It created a kind of cycle of inspiration that told young people that, you know what, I could be Fiona Mutesi. I could do that, because there was no one else in that landscape of that film that was anyone different from their own lives. So that is the trick somehow. If one can get that specifically local thing truthfully, the world, I think, recognizes it. And as the director or as the storytellers, if we can plumb the emotional significance, then you get the power that to speak to people way beyond the location that you are, way beyond. And speaking of your lovely African, you were saying you cast these lovely normal people. You must come to Uganda, because we have a curvy contest there. And it is my famous, I love
there.
it, because it is just nothing to do with anything that you or I might consider as body beautiful. But man, it's body beautiful.
So one time, what I like to think about when I think about these inclusion policies getting canceled, and I work with a lot of Gen Z students, and I just love them. I love their outlook. I love their perspective. And I try to remind them, about 75 million, 78 million folks voted a single way. There's 330 million plus people in the United States, and they want what this panel is talking about, right? And that's the power of entertainment. All those folks want stories from people from a variety of different communities, resonating with authentic experiences, resonating in ways in which they haven't heard before, picking stories that are central and crucial and specific. That's what inclusion's all about, right? What advice do each of you have for the generation that is approaching the entertainment industry and wanting to tell stories in any way? What is your advice for those folks upon commencement going in?
Okay, I'll give you two sets of advice. The advice I gave my daughter, who just graduated from UCLA in the theater, film, and television program, is major in economics next time. But that's what I'd say to my daughter. Okay, what I would say to someone else is take advantage of the fact that yes, the industry's changing. Naomi's right. We don't know what that next disruption is going to be, so it's kind of hard to figure out. So I would just encourage them to write if you're a writer, act if you're an actor, do whatever it is. You don't have to get paid for it. Just do it, because when the opportunity comes, you have to be ready. Writers write, actors act, okay? Directors direct. So my advice is always the same thing. Do your craft, work on your craft, be ready whenever the door is open. We don't know what that's going to look like, but be ready.
My advice builds perfectly on that, which is get the writers who write and the actors who act and the directors who direct, and go make something. Like I was saying with indie film, this is not a time to try to figure out how to work the system, because the system is changing so dramatically that that's hard. So instead, go find your story that nobody can tell the way that you can tell it. Get a group of friends together and make it. That is what this moment is about. Make the weirdest, most specific shit that only you can make, and get it into film or whatever form you want to tell it in, but make it. Don't wait around for anybody to give you permission. Go out and make your story.
All of us here are in collaborative art forms, and I think about collaboration a lot, and I think about collaboration in democracy a lot, actually, that we are collaborating on this system of government, and we are in collaborative art forms. We're not novelists, we're not painters. We need lots and lots of other people to help us render this art form. So I always say, find your community and find an ongoing community, right? So if it's a theater company or a bunch of friends that you want to do your stuff with, and it's an intense time to be an artist, and we are more needed than ever.
I mean, I really share the great independence of my co-panelists. I believe a couple of other things I would say to a young person. One is read and also keep reading. And the other is what they say in the namesake, travel the world, or travel the world. See, that humility comes from knowing what the world is. I read a strange statistic that I think 60% of Americans don't have passports, and they think that the world is where they are. But the world is much bigger than this, and the world is powerful and significant.
Well, I promised that it would be an absolutely outstanding panel, and they lived up to all of my expectations. Two last things. One, Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. This is a room of prepared people to change the world, and the world needs changing. And second, and more practically, the way that marginalized communities soar in the entertainment industry is really easy. Watch content by marginalized communities and go when their movies are at the box office. And on that note, congratulations, Jodie Foster. And thank you, panel.
That concludes today's program. Born Curious is brought to you by Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Our producer is Alan Grazioso. Kevin Grady, Anna Song, Productions, Inc.
And Cabin 3 Media provided editing and production support.
Many thanks to Jane Huber for editorial support.
And we are your co-hosts. I'm Heather Min.
And I'm Evilise Estrada.
Our website where you can listen to all our episodes is radcliffe.harvard.edu/borncurious. If you have feedback, you can email us at info@radcliffe.harvard.edu.
You can follow Harvard Radcliffe Institute on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads. And as always, you can find Born Curious wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for learning with us.
And join us next time.